Welcome to the Great Boil Off. In this video you'll see some lightweight stoves and cook gear that are used in backpacking. We hope to run some tests and give some idea of the relative performance of these kits and maybe even pick out the best one. But first, let me reminisce a bit. This is my personal Boy Scout cook kit from the 1950s. With these thin aluminum pans, we tried to cook outside over wood-burning fires, and most of the time those efforts didn't turn out very well. After all, I really didn't even cook inside over a gas range very much, and here I was trying to use this to cook outside over too big a fire. But I did learn, don't use thin gear over a wood-burning flame. But today, with modern stoves and modern cook kits, you can do a much better job of cooking outside with a lot less effort. So let's take a look at some of these. Today, cooking outdoors is much easier. Not only do you have lightweight cooking gear, but you have these stoves. You've got butane stoves, you've got alcohol stoves, Sterno stoves, solid fuel stoves, liquid fuel stoves. Cooking outdoors is a lot easier, but especially because a lot of the so-called cooking is really done with dehydrated foods. And the instructions for the dehydrated foods begin with bring 2 cups of water to a boil. So for our test purposes, we're going to be boiling water, anticipating using that water in a dehydrated meal. Before I try to get all of these stoves lit and boiling water at the same time, let's take a look at some of the individual features and details of the stoves and how each one is lit. Here are 3 different fuels. It'll be interesting to see how they compare in the test. On the left is a Esbit solid fuel. In the middle is Sterno, and on the right is denatured alcohol. I understand that the Sterno is actually a kind of a gelled alcohol. So let's light them. Now turn the lights off so we can see the flames a little better. These are variations of the well-known pocket rocket. On the left is the original pocket rocket. In the middle is the pocket rocket 2. And on the right is a very cheap clone of the pocket rocket. So let's see how these burn. Turn it up all the way. Pocket rocket 2 up all the way. Coleman actually has the starter built. I'm not sure what went wrong with this Etekcity, the clone of the pocket rocket. Even though it was cheap, about $10 as I recall, it was highly recommended, and in fact it worked well when I took it out of the box. And now I can't get it to work at all. It just won't stay on. Off camera I've tried it on different fuels, cans of fuels, and nothing seems to work. Doesn't work on full throttle, doesn't work on part throttle. I'll try to find out more about this problem, and if I do learn something, I'll make a separate video about the problems. In the meantime, I've removed the Etekcity from the test. After tinkering around a bit with the Etekcity burner, I finally realized that the best way to get consistent results is to crack the valve open slightly get the flame going, then put the water on top and open the valve all the way. This seems to work pretty consistently. Otherwise, sometimes it doesn't light or the flame just blows out. Next, we have two variations of the Jetboil and also a new one that's, to me, that is called a SnowPeak. All of these have a self-starter. Turn it up all the way. This is the original Jetboil. The new standalone Jetboil and the SnowPeak. This next stove is the oldest stove in the group and the most used stove in the group. It's more than a little bit different from the other stoves I'll be showing. This one is called the MSR Whisperlite. I got it in the mid-80s to go backpacking in Philmont. And this stove uses a liquid fuel, a kind of a gasoline. In fact, it said that it could run on gasoline, but what we're actually running it on here is camp fuel, which is usually called Coleman fuel. It's a sort of a less explosive version of gasoline. You pour the fuel into this fuel bottle, which then has to be pumped up to build up some pressure. And then to start the Whisperlight, we'll open this control valve, get a few drops of the liquid fuel down here in this lower pan, and then light that lower pan. The fuel burning in the lower pan will vaporize the fuel in these loops of tubing. And then once that is done, we can open the control valve a little bit more and get a nice flame on the Whisperlight. So let's do that. A few pumps. You can probably hear it. And now light the pan. We'll let that burn down a little bit. And as the flame dies down for warming it up, we'll crack open the control valve. Whisperlight's a very nice stove. Flame is adjustable. It is a little bit awkward to get it going. It does tend to burn with a little bit of soot. And now, let's light some stoves and boil some water. Take about half of these flags, and when you see one starting to boil, drop a flag in. What else do we have to get with? We got the Jetboil on. The Esbit temperature is 185. The mini Trangia is now boiling. The Sterno is 166. Well, that was interesting. Kind of chaotic, but still a few things were learned. For one thing, the Esbit, the Sterno didn't do so well. They couldn't even bring the water to boil, so they won't be tested any further. The Jetboil, as expected, did very well, but the Jetboil kit only takes this particular pot. I got an adapter to go with the Jetboil burner, so we'll be trying that and trying some different pots. We'll also try a few other pots. I'm going to compare two bush kettles. This one is stainless steel. This one is made out of titanium. So we'll see how they do. I added in another small pot, a cup really, made of stainless steel. And we'll keep the two Trangias in here right now, but using non-Trangia pots. I'm going to take a Trangia pot and use it on one of the butane burners. Also, on the Jetboil, we'll be using a kettle. So, several new things to test here on this second go-round. And it's like a boil on the Trangia, not on the mini Trangia yet. And boiling on the mini Trangia. There's a lot of variation in the performance of these stoves and pots. The great boil-off couldn't really demonstrate the variation of the stoves and the pots and mixing and matching different pots to stoves. I went back and took timed measurements on some of the better combinations and some of the worst combinations, and I'll show that data now. The performance of the burner depends on the pot that's placed on it. So to separate the pots from the burners, I brought the pots inside and ran some tests on my gas range. Here are the results of those gas range tests. All tests were done on the same small burner. The results shown are averages for pots without lids. Of course, the time to boil is greatly reduced with a lid. In fact, it doesn't seem to matter whether the lid is matched to the pot or is a simple piece of aluminum foil. The gross average time to reach boiling was a little over 6 minutes. In general, stainless steel pots did not perform as well as aluminum pots. The Jetboil aluminum pot with fins was the best performer. The worst performer was pot number 8, the tall Stanley pot made of stainless steel. Strangely, both the Jetboil and the Stanley are tall with small diameters. To see the effects of materials, 3 identical Trangia pots were tested. The pots were made of aluminum, plain anodized aluminum, and anodized aluminum with a nonstick coating. Although there wasn't a lot of difference, strictly speaking, the anodized aluminum was the best. My conclusions from the pot test were: use a lid, use a large diameter pot, don't use a tall pot, don't use stainless steel. I'll expound on the details of the pot test in a separate video, but for now, back to the burner test. Wow, that's a lot of data. And I know it's squeezed into a small slide, but we'll look at it in pieces. Here's how it came about. This data is not from the boil-off demos shown previously. Instead, many separate tests were conducted. Pots were swapped around. There's a lot of scatter in the data, but some conclusions can still be made. First, the pocket rocket and similar designs really put out a lot of heat. These designs were among the fastest to bring water to a boil. Also, they are very noisy. Just notice the difference in noise during the demo parts of the video. The pocket rockets did struggle a bit with the tall Stanley stainless steel pot, but most of the other stoves struggled with it as well. Again, stainless steel pots in general took longer to bring the water to a boil. Pot number 5, a GSI Soloist, worked well with the pocket rocket design. The Jetboil Flash worked very well with its own finned pot, but not as well when fitted with an adapter and using other pots. The Jetboil Mighty Mo, which is somewhat similar to the pocket rocket, worked well. The MSR Whisperlite using liquid fuel was among the best performers. The Mini Trangia, which is simply the alcohol burner from the Trangia 27 kit, was the poorest performer of all the stoves. The full-size Trangia 27 was better than the Mini Trangia, but still not as good as the other stoves. And now for some conclusions. Remember that the original goal of this project was to find a burner that would bring water to a boil quickly. Along the way, I found out that the pot mattered as well, so I ran some tests on pots. In a way, some of the results were not surprising, but I did learn some things along the way. For one thing, the Jetboil, which is dedicated to bringing water to a boil quickly, worked very well. It's just not very versatile. Another thing that I learned was that the stainless steel products like this, even though they can be inexpensive and compact, they really just don't work as well as some of the aluminum pots. According to my test, the way to bring water to a boil quickly is with a pocket rocket. Probably not a surprise to anyone. A good pot for the pocket rocket is something about this size and shape. This one is aluminum. Doesn't really matter whether it's anodized or non-stick coated aluminum, but something about this size and shape worked out really well. The popular Stanley stainless steel pot, inexpensive, many people like it and talk about how well it works, but it just did not work out well in these tests. The pot is a little too tall, it's a little too small in diameter. Now, if you put this on top of a pocket rocket, it works. It brings water to a boil. It's just a little bit slower than some of the other designs. Things like Sterno and the solid fuel tablets just didn't work out. They just don't bring the water to a boil. People like them. They can be good for warming things up. They just don't bring water to a boil. My Trangia kit that I like very much, and I especially like the kit aspects of it, was kind of slow on bringing water to a boil. Most of these stoves and pots are targeted towards an individual or maybe two people and backpacking. For a larger group, I would use this MSR Whisperlite, larger pots of course, and that I have experience with and it works out really well. And so, wrapping this up, I hope you've learned as much as I did from this little project. As you go out and use these burners and stoves, remember you're going to need a glove. Things get hot, and a pair of pliers is a pretty good idea. So be safe.